Post-Brexit border checks will finally be implemented next year, having been delayed 5 times because the UK wasn't ready for the impact. Brexit is the term used to describe the United Kingdom's withdrawal from the European Union. It was a complex and quite controversial process that began in 2016 with a referendum in which the majority of British people that voted on the day voted to leave the EU. The UK had been a member of the EU since 1973, but there had always been a strong current of Euroscepticism within the country, and this was due to a number of factors, including concerns about the loss of sovereignty, the perceived negative impact of EU membership on the UK economy, and a feeling that the EU was not democratic enough. Well, we know better nowadays. In the run-up to the 2016 referendum, the two main campaigns were the Vote Leave campaign, which argued that the UK would be better off outside the EU, and the Remain campaign, which argued that the UK would be worse off outside the EU. We know who was right. The referendum was held on June 23rd in 2016. The turnout was high, with 72% of eligible voters casting their ballots. The Leave campaign won with 51.9% of the vote, while the Remain campaign won 48.1% of the vote. Following the referendum, the UK government began negotiations with the EU to agree the terms of its withdrawal. These negotiations were complex and protracted, and they were often acrimonious. The main sticking points were the future of the Irish border, fishing rights, and the financial settlement that the UK would pay to the EU. After 18 months of negotiations, the UK and the EU reached a withdrawal agreement on November 24th in 2018. The withdrawal agreement set out the terms of the UK's departure from the EU, including the date of withdrawal, which was January 31st in 2020, but also the future of the Irish border and the financial settlement. The withdrawal agreement provided for a transition period of up to 2 years after the date of withdrawal. During the transition period, the UK remained bound by EU law and continued to participate in the single market and the customs union. This was done to allow for a smooth transition to the UK's new relationship with the EU. Very late, but the UK and the EU also agreed a framework for their future relationship, and this framework covered a wide range of issues, including trade, security, and cooperation on scientific research. However, the details of the future relationship were still to be negotiated. And the transition period came to an end on December 31st in 2020, and this meant that the UK was fully independent of the EU from that date onwards. The UK has since negotiated a free trade agreement with the EU, but this agreement does not give the UK as much access to the EU market as it had before Brexit. It is too early to say what the long-term impact of Brexit will be on the UK economy. However, there is quite some evidence that the UK economy is performing worse than it was before the referendum. For example, GDP growth has been weaker and there are labour shortages in the UK. Brexit has also had a significant impact on the UK's political landscape. The country is more divided than it has been for decades, and there is no clear consensus on the future of the UK's relationship with the EU. Brexit is a complex and controversial issue that will continue to have a significant impact on the UK for many years to come. And delayed 5 times, as I said, the UK's post-Brexit system of import controls on food and animal and plant products, such as meat, fish and dairy, arriving from the EU, is finally due to be launched on January 31st in 2024. 3 months later, the second phase of the new Brexit border target operating model, the BTOM, covering imports from the rest of the world, will kick in. At least that's the theory. Previous starting dates have been postponed for reasons offered up by ministers ranging from the impact of COVID to the Russian invasion of Ukraine. More recently, the cost of living crisis and inflation have also been thrown into the mix, even though EU states managed to implement corresponding checks on UK goods arriving at their borders immediately after they left the EU. In a rare apparent moment of honesty, Jacob Rees-Mogg, of all people, appeared to admit the real reason for the UK continually kicking the can down the road when confirming the latest delay last April while still Minister for Brexit Opportunities. Describing the delay as good news for consumers in the context of a cost of living crisis, he said enforcing the post-Brexit checks would have been an act of self-harm. Oh. Rees-Mogg is of course no longer a minister, but his prophecy could soon become a reality, with at least some of the new costs faced by EU exporters negotiating the UK's new trading barriers with their nearest neighbours likely to be passed on to consumers. So what does it all mean for those tasked with implementing the BTOM? At ports like Hull, spare a thought for the people having to manage the biggest shake-up in the way they import food and animal and plant products in 30 years. Inspectors at the Hull and Goole Port Health Authority will carry out both documentary and physical checks using 2 state-of-the-art border control posts at Hull's King George Dock and Killingholme on the Humber. They were built at huge expense with the intention of becoming operational in July 2021, but have remained largely unused thanks to the ever-changing political goalposts. Between them, Hull and Killingholme typically handle nearly 150 million kilos of EU food every year. At the moment, none of it is subject to any import checks or charges, but that will change from February. Having previously recruited staff to cope with the anticipated extra workload and only to be forced to make them redundant because of the delays, the current approach is a cautious one. Sally Johnson, the authority's chief report health inspector, is planning to hire a number of temporary staff until the full impact of the new regime is known, while required veterinary work is being contracted out. So it's a chicken and egg situation. Income from new inspection charges will cover the extra staffing costs, but until goods start arriving in bulk, stopgap funding is coming from the government to pay their wages. However, in true muddled post-Brexit style, this particular pot of cash from the Department of Environment, Food and Rural Affairs runs out soon. In a new report, Johnson said a multitude of outstanding operational and financial uncertainties associated with developing area of policy and readiness concerns remain. Critically, the funding to underpin operational requirements associated with the new regime will be stopped almost immediately on the new regime going live. DEFRA recognized that the short timescales now involved mean that there will be issues with recruiting and training staff to operate at full capacity by April 30th. Now on the Brexit frontline, port health authorities still fulfill their original remit by controlling infectious disease affecting passengers and crew on vessels arriving in the UK, or checking food safety, sanitation and hygiene on board ships, monitoring dockside pollution, as well as inspecting food imports to minimize the risk to public health. Yet they remain something of a Cinderella service within the wider local government world, and their work is almost unknown to the general public. The Hull and Goole Authority dates from 1887 and is mainly funded by a simple annual levy paid by the 3 local councils based around the estuary. As such, financing a major recruitment drive at short notice is no easy task. And meanwhile, EU producers will be weighing up the cost of continuing to ship their goods to the UK as they face a raft of new charges and paperwork. Under the BTOM, the requirements to carry out physical checks on low and medium risk goods is being reduced to just 1% of all imports. However, high-risk products from the EU will still be subject to 100% documentary, identity and physical checks. At the Humber ports, that will equate to a £370 charge per high-risk consignment, whereas at the moment there are no checks or charges at all. And even low-risk food and animal origin products from the EU will be subject to charges for the first time. Consignments of up to 6 tons will be subject to a minimum inspection charge of £49.36 per load, with an additional £8 being levied for every additional tonne above that. The new charges are in line with those already imposed on non-EU imports. Little wonder Rishi Sunak described his Windsor Framework deal as unbelievably special for Northern Ireland, hailing the province's continued unhindered access to the EU single market as exciting, even if appearing to miss the irony of it all. For the rest of the people in the UK, however, the latest economic equivalent of shooting yourself in the foot is almost upon them. And from February 2024, you once again, to a lot of people, have to say, welcome to the Brexit, sir. And if you want to know more, the next video is right here on the end screen. I'll see you there. I'll be back.